Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on audit preparation. We have a number of announcements to get through before we get started with the presentation. First of all, you'll notice that there is a poll question on your screen. The question is, when was the last DCMA audit performed at your organization? If everyone could take just a brief moment to answer that poll question, we'll share the results with the group here in just a minute or two before we get started. The second announcement, I'd like to let everyone know that we will be recording this presentation, so that's just for your awareness. Also, we're going to be saving our questions for the end of the presentation. If you want to go ahead and queue them up throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to start typing them in. There is a questions panel on your GoToWebinar little panel that you see on your screen where your name is listed as an attendee. If you click on that questions panel, you can type in your question, and then at the end of the presentation, I will present those questions to our presenters today. So feel free to start writing them as they come to you, and we'll have those queued up and ready to go. Also, I have shared a copy of the presentation with everyone prior to this meeting. If you didn't get a copy or if you need a copy, just shoot me an email and I will share that with you. Also, we are awarding 1 CEU credit to everybody that is an NPMA member that is participating today. If you happen to be in a group and only one of you has logged into the GoToWebinar, please send me an email or a chat message with the names of those that are also attending with you, and I'll make sure that they receive credit for their participation. Okay, let's take a look at the poll question. It looks like the majority of you have voted, so that's great. I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and share the results. Okay, so again, the question, when was the last DCMA audit performed at your organization? 17% of you are not aware of a previous audit, 3% say more than 3 years ago, 20% within the last 3 years, 55% within the last 12 months, and 5% of you have one coming up. So it's great information for us, and thank you for sharing that information as we get started with the presentation. I'm going to hide the results of the poll and take a look here, close the poll. Okay, so I believe everyone should be able to see the presentation. Just taking a quick look here to confirm that. Okay, I think we are good. So I feel like we're looking at the poll question still, so I'm just trying to make sure that is in fact closed. Yeah. Peter, could you reshare your screen, please?
Sure.
Thanks. Perfect. Okay, now we're in better shape. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'd like to quickly introduce the two presenters that we have for today before we get into the presentation. We have two very experienced presenters that have got a lot of great information for us. The first is Pat Jacklitz. Pat is A to B Tracking's asset management expert, and she has more than 35 years of experience in property management and was formerly the manager of property management for Northrop Grumman's aerospace systems sector in the Eastern region. Pat is currently the NPMA Foundation Administrator. She received the prestigious Property Person of the Year Award from the NPMA and the Individual Contributor Award from the DoD IUID Program Office. She is a frequent speaker at NPMA events and continues to impress audiences with her knowledge of this industry. And second, we also have with us Peter Collins. Peter is A to B Tracking's president and CEO and has worked with many industries, including the Department of Defense, on auto ID policy development and implementation. He has played a key role as a consultant to the DoD and the department's effort to adopt the use of IUID technology in 2004. He received the ID Global Leadership Award in 2009 for his role in worldwide adoption of IUID and is an active participant in IUID industry trade associations. So thank you, Pat and Peter, for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. Pat, are you there with me?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let's get started here. So today's session is entitled Impact of Audit Readiness in 2019 and How to Prepare. Pat and I are here to speak to some of the overview around what it means in this audit-ready environment where it's required of you in which to have all your record keeping and your inventories accurate in light of what's going on for the Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness Initiative that's being put forth by the Department of Defense. We'll give you a foundation of what that looks like and what to be prepared for and how we actually got here, or how the Pentagon and the Department of Defense got here more specifically. Then we'll hone in on relative to the way in which you need to be reporting information off to the government and maintaining your own record keeping within your own operations, and how to use some tools these days to help streamline that process and make sure that you can perform it consistently and give yourself an ongoing competitive advantage in this kind of environment. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over and let Pat kick it off here with talking about the directorate itself, FIAR.
Okay, so normally when we do this presentation, we're looking at people, and now I'm looking at my screen, so I can't see reactions from everyone, and I typically ask the first question, how many are familiar or who knows what FIAR is? And you get some yeses and nos and some blank looks, and so we figure we better give you a little bit of a picture of what it's about. It's the Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness Plan. It's for DoD to be in full audit compliance with their property, plant, equipment, and operating materials and supplies, and was to be completed by 2017. And the main focus was actually on the mission critical assets, and they needed to verify the existence or the inventory completeness and existence for this audit readiness by 2018, for FY 2018. Next slide, please. So it actually started back in 2011, and that was when we had Defense Secretary Panetta, and he said, okay, all hands on deck. He said, we really need to get this done, and we're going to make sure it's done in accordance with our directorate. We property professionals, however, know that this actually began back in 1990 with the Chief Financial Officers Act. And it just goes to show you that it's not so easy for the government to get there. First, we had to get through the 1662 era. In fact, looking at the Department of Homeland Security as an example, they're relatively new and small, and they're very small compared to DoD, and it took them 10 years to obtain their clean audit opinion. So here we are, 1990, and we're in 2018 to 92, wow, 28 years later, and we still don't have that clean financial audit opinion. So we want to make sure that you're ready for this. What this is actually comparable to, it's comparable to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that corporations are required to do for their financial statements. I don't know that the current Secretary of Defense, retired U.S. Marine Corporate General James Mathis, has issued anything on the subject, but next slide. We do know that the DoD Comptroller, David Norquist, next slide please, that David Norquist said by the spring, we will have 100 auditors inspecting the DoD from book to floor and floor to book. Sounds familiar to us property people. And now the government's going to do that actually to themselves. And he's saying being audited will be part of their new norm. One of the things he stated was, and which often happens with audits, is the public goes, well, what became of it? And he said, what do people do? He continued to say that each year the public will see the findings and what were fixed and what remains to be done. So he states that they're valuable. He states that often those areas where people are doing things manually or the data is not compatible is where you need to streamline them and get more efficiencies and get more savings. Next slide, please. So looking at the FIAR deadlines here, back in wave 1 in 2013, they received their appropriation for the audit readiness and started to look at what exactly needs to be done. Then in 2014, which was wave 2, the military departments was started to get looked at and prepare what they were going to do. In 2015, 16, and 17, well, 15 and 16, wave 3, they started doing the military departments themselves and small business administration audits. And then back in 2017, which was really only last year, they took a look at the rest of the military departments and said, hey, you got to be ready because in 2018, we are going to start this DoD consolidated full audit. Okay. So what they're looking at the improvement for their audit readiness and what information would be essential for them to ensure that they have effective control of their mission critical assets. And what are they? Well, that's their military equipment. We know them, the main big assets, the ships, the aircraft, combat vehicles, engines, etc. And inventory, what's their inventory? It's their rations, their supplies, their spare parts, all the logistics stuff that they need to keep their equipment and military equipment running. And then their operating material and supplies, the ammunition, the munitions, the missiles, and then all the general equipment, the support equipment that's required, including the tooling and test equipment. The financial management asset information includes things such as a unique item identifier, which we know is the UII, the category or type of item that it is, the location, which we know is very important, the status, the description, who has the custody of it, and where is it being controlled, and the financial, who's responsible as the financial reporting entity. And all of this must be on the accountable property system of record. Now, we know back in the day when we thought the contractors were the accountable record, but no, we've since learned, since the demise of 1662s and this new FIAR and new FAR regulation, that the APSR, the government's record, is actually the official record, and what contractors have are the custodial records or stewardship records. We continue to see changes with the government. For instance, we see things, well, now we have a new GFP module, and where before we were doing IRAFT and we were doing 1662s before that. We're seeing the government continually change and try to get themselves better so that they can perform this get a clean audit opinion on their financials. Next slide, please. So, using the serially managed assets, everything is reseeded. They want to capture the information using the IUID, and they capture that information in the GFP module, and which then would furnish information to the registry as it's applicable. Where you were doing reporting for non-serially managed items in IRAPT, you're now doing it in the GFP module. and anything that was in the IUID registry or that was reported up through there has been transitioned to the GFP module. Everything's been migrated. Next slide, please.
So Pat, yeah, those are all great points. And, you know, there's certainly a number of shifts that are happening within this ecosystem where the government, for any e-commerce transactions, whether they be property or new acquisition, wide area workflow, as they often refer to it, the importance of getting the data correct is becoming more critical to contractors, because in some cases you may need to take the data that's part of that reporting obligation and encode it into the use of auto ID technologies. And these symbols, these graphical symbols you see on this slide, will represent the variety of auto ID technologies that have now become part of the normal routine within the military and what they depend on from the contracting community. Now, the slide a moment ago you were referring to, you would know that an IUID is that unique item that's unique on a global scale that represents that item, much like a thumbprint would represent us, you know, as individuals, never to be used or repeated again. It's only used once for that specific item, and therefore it needs to last the life of that item across the entire life cycle, which could be, you know, 3 years if it's traditional IT equipment, or it could be many decades if you've got parts going on aircraft and so forth. But they all need to be represented with this UID, which comes in the form of a 2D barcode that you see here in the upper left corner. The good news about once you've encoded that UID in the form of a barcode, you can use automatic data capture technologies, scanners, if you will, just like we use when we're checking out at the grocery store, in which to capture that specific item apart from any other item. And that's really where the serialized asset management comes into play, where you can uniquely identify that one specific item among many items with that same part number. But getting this data right is going to be crucial to the way in which you operate as a contractor. Now, on the right-hand side here, you'll see the representation of a RFID tag. So to distinguish between IUID and RFID is important at this point, because your IUID represents your item and your RFID tag represents your shipment or the pallet or case information that represents that shipment as it's coming from your facility. And you'll often hear it going off to contracts that have an obligation to deliver to DLA, for instance. These DLA facilities are equipped with scanners or readers that read RFID tags upon receipt, so that they know when they receive and inspect those items, they have that accurate information linked through to your shipment as you're shipping it out your doors. And so these two auto ID technologies have unique and distinct ways in which they're being used and expected to be used as part of your contract obligations. And like everything else that we'll be talking about here, you know, we want to first emphasize the fact that it all starts with your contract obligations and what your contract states is required of you. Which brings us to what we refer to as this Pentagon compliance roadmap, where this roadmap really should give you a sense of the way in which data is moving and the way in which assets or products are moving through to the military and to and from your organizations. So I'd like to kind of represent the 1, 2, 3 through 6 and talk a little bit about the way that this information flows. So starting up here as the contractor item obligation who might be building and shipping end items off to the government, you're really trying to key in on this DFARS obligations 52211-7003 that will represent this need in which to mark and report these individual items as part of your CLINs that you're delivering off to the government. So that means that, of course, you need to pack up and ship your items, but you also need to report this through number 3 here, which is the wide area workflow, formerly known as IRAPT, and many of you still may know it as IRAPT, but that in fact is changing. The naming of that system is currently in the process of being changed back to wide area workflow again. The shipment itself can be represented also by way of the data going to the government in an advanced ship notice that gives you detail about the kind of shipment that's coming across and what's the contents of that shipment. Number 2 on this chart also represents if you're the prime contractor with those responsibilities to report when you ship something, so in fact you can invoice it, much like a DD 250 would be represented. You have the obligation in which to take your subcontractor items and materials into your own process and make sure that they're linked up properly in your database with your records so that the data and information that you're sending off to the government has all the represented assets that the government needs and wants to know. Because like Pat stated a moment ago, here in this system, at this point in the process, when you've reported that through to the government, that data is in fact getting ingested not only into the wide area workflow in order to get you paid, but also it feeds into the IUID registry, which is where all of this asset data is going to reside in order for the government to take advantage of it and do what they need to do, which in turn is to populate their APSRs. But of course, as you go steps 1, 2, and 3 here, then in fact, it needs to get received and inspected through the process, which is why DCMA gets involved in this cycle to ensure that what you're shipping is meeting all your contract obligations, again, inclusive down to the need to mark it according to this IUID standard for asset identification, and shipment markings according to the shipment standards being called out as well. So DCMA plays a role, of course, when it comes to these new acquisitions, and it feeds through to the military environment here. Number 4 represents you as your contract responsibilities on property. And that's represented in terms of your reporting obligation of 252.211-7007. And your responsibility, again, to Pat's point about the way that data now is being absorbed in through this GFP module inside the wide area workflow framework, along with these advanced shipments notices that are going through to DCMA. Again, your record keeping is crucial to make sure that you not only get your records and all the data elements required, obviously, but also to make sure that the auto ID requirements of putting an IUID on it, et cetera, is established and is being performed consistently. So this way of the Pentagon requiring you to submit your data and obligating you to mark accordingly on the case or pallet or the physical item itself is something that is going to be the way in which you do business and a cost to you to be doing business really for any foreseeable future because of this overall overarching imperative for audit readiness and the use of this data in which to ensure that the right equipment's getting to the right people at the right time. Inventory control practices, which is really the imperative here to make sure that you're doing it right. So back to you.
So as part of that, in order to see that it works, DoD issued an instruction, and it's that 8320.04, which was to set the standards for the IUID tangible personal property. And one of the areas within there said that the IUID registry will be the central repository for the government items with the UII, anything acquired after 1/1/2004. But it also stated that the UID registry would be the master data source for reporting GFP, which we now know is going to be in the GFP module and will ultimately go to the registry. But it also stated that the DCMA would be responsible to set up some systematic assessments to understand that the clauses were being complied with by contractors. Not only the reporting clause, as we noted, but also the Mill Standard 130 clause, which is the clause, which is the Mill Standard for marking, and also Mill Standard 129, which, as you saw on the RFID labels, that's the Mill Standard for shipping. And they needed to make sure that there would be compliant marking on the shipping as well. Next slide, please. So there were some expectations with the industry partners. In July of 2017, Brian Sykes, who was the CPA for OSD and FIAR, he presented to the GFP working group a presentation that was called the DoD Audit GFP Considerations. And when that happened, there was a message that came out of that meeting, and it was kind of like reasonable notification that an audit would take place would be 10 business days. Wow. We in industry have always thought of it as a 30-day window. So I don't know. Again, if we were in person, we'd say, okay, is anyone getting notifications within 10 days? I don't know that they are. But as part of that, it would include anything that had to do with subcontractors. And that site visits could actually take place outside of normal business hours. And we typically say, okay, our business hours are 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever our hours are. And it was usually within that time frame. Again, we don't know if we're being tasked with things for outside normal business hours, but that was some of the expectations that they were expecting from industry partners. And the other comment that was made as part of that was the fact that NASA has done it, so can DoD. So we need to see that there's some communication going on, that we need to understand and be clear when we get notifications of audits, that what they expect and what we can expect, and that hopefully this new normal will not be for DoD contractors in possession of GFP to go through extraordinary efforts to help the government comply with their FIAR audits. We would still expect some more details and some more instructions from our component reps, the contracting offices, DCMA reps, etc. And if you have any questions on it, you should always be communicating with your DCMA reps to make sure that it's understood. But the message from them was, we're not fooling around. We need to get this done. Next slide, please. So what the government's trying to do, they're trying to leverage the use of IUID registry. We know that's going on now for in excess of 15 years now. And they're still fine-tuning it and whatnot, and they wanted to use it so that they can achieve that audit readiness. Most of the financial information the government needs will be in there. It's going to enable them to get some reporting so that it can get some information to their APSR ultimately. What we're seeing is with this new GFP module that's being rolled out in 5 different phases, that they're working towards that that end. You know, the first phase was the fact that they wanted to get the GFP attachments within the EDA environment and automated so that the data that's in there will be reusable when they implemented phase 2, which has been now implemented, and you would be able to use some of the data on the items that you reported as received so that you don't have to type information. And again, you'll be able to reuse that data when you're doing your transactions, whether it's transfers or shipments, etc. And then additional phases would be to incorporate PCARs and loss reporting tools within the GFP module. And then phase 4 and 5, I believe, are going to fine-tune some of those integrations with the registry and give some capabilities for updates on the contractor side. One thing that we should note is that the IUID registry will no longer collect any data about non-UII GFP. That's being reported through the GFP registry and being compared now to the GFP attachment. So you could see that these enhancements and fine-tunings are supposed to help us or help the government, which means that our record keeping and reporting needs to be right on key. Next slide.
Right. So that leads us to where we can put in perspective, this very specific, unique asset accountability and where we are with it right now as an industry at large. As you can see above the iceberg above the waterline, that as of this week, earlier this week, I believe, was the reporting date on this. We have 39,521,620 assets that are registered. And in the IUID registry, that is, that these accountable property management systems of record can pull from. But yet, according to this GAO report that I'll mention in a moment here, that there is approximately 110 million assets, and I'm sure that number has grown since this period of time, that have this accountability issue where they need to be, reported within the system and being tracked according to these new standards, these new guidelines. It's interesting to note also, as far as GFP numbers, they extract GFP specific loads of data, meaning reporting of data submissions up to the registry, and that number accounts for about 2.62 million of that bigger, almost 40 million assets registered number. The other categories would be legacy assets already in the military possession, as well as new acquisitions. So a lot more to go here. Now, again, this is getting the data right, and Pat mentioned a moment ago a really important point when she, in a very subtle way, said, okay, the goal is to reuse the data, right, and take it from one system and make sure it migrates to another system. And that is, in fact, what this is about, is that so data doesn't end up being siloed and having 10 different versions of the same part or the same item in a system. And so how IUID, as a unique representation of an item, supports asset management is that when you have each item identified, you can get that visibility over what you have in its current configuration, in its current state of readiness, in its current status, its location, its quantity. All of those things now can get captured in a very automated way and updated to the systems by the scan of a barcode. So it gets you to a point of knowing what you have, and also helps you manage spares, practically speaking, because yes, like everything else that falls under an audit, it's, are you meeting your contract obligations? But also from the government side looking at this, they're saying, are we using taxpayer dollars responsibly in a way where we're managing inventories according to best business practices, where we know we're getting repeatable process in getting the data that supports this reporting obligation for inventory. So we're not sitting on billions of dollars worth of spare parts and components. So it goes without saying that, you know, we are all human, and we all make errors in transcribing and, you know, using the stubby pencil and the clipboard. And so this auto ID approach to all of this should eliminate that slow or error-prone manual processing. And that goes without saying that we know industries have staked their claim on it in retail environments and grocery stores and the like, where we just count on it every day, in which to make sure that we're getting charged the right thing at the checkout line and as we load it into our cars. And the last point to make too is that there is a very real return on investment for the government that's been analyzed. You know, this is a military-wide number. This isn't what you need to be thinking about by way of your own investment, but recognize that the government in military specifically went in and said, you know, what kind of yield will we get by auto ID enabling the use of this technology and being able to capture barcodes at the right points in the life cycle of these assets, from acquisition through disposal, from cradle to grave. And they found that $3.2 billion invested over a period of time, of course that's not all at once, will yield over a $4 billion annual return. So that's the kind of investment that any commercial organization would say it would be ridiculous not to make that investment if you can make it back within a reasonable period. And you know, you're starting to look at the numbers for 40 billion, 50 billion over a 10-year period, and you know that goes pretty quickly sometimes in these circles, that time frame. Then there's very real benefit downstream to those that need the inventory at the right time to ensure that warfighter safety and preparedness for situations when our soldiers are put in harm's way. So for instance, making sure that if a component on a weapon is recalled over and over again, maybe there is something systemic, a problem with that particular part for that particular weapon system. So we want to make sure that auto ID as a technology for good data gives us the right accurate data representing that part, and knowing that you can extract the bad actors from inside the system because you can detect them before they become a bigger systemic problem. In fact, one of the bigger stories of driving the need for this IUID revolves around parts that had gone, that had become problematic for the Chinook helicopter program. And because there was a part that was critical to the operation of the Chinook, they realized that it was a problem that had gone through the good portion of the fleet undetected, and that that was driving the need to ensure that they had this item level accountability now, after they had to spend a huge amount of money compromising missions. This was back in the late 90s, and ground the fleet for a period to make sure it was inspected and resolved. So also eliminating counterfeit parts. We all know that this global supply chain that we're faced with now presents a risk for us as a country, and to ensure that these counterfeit parts are detected, or non-conforming parts are detected and extracted. It should also enable rapid deployment capability. When you have inventory and you know where it is and its state of readiness, now you can make smarter decisions faster, make sure that they're deployed and used in the right areas of operation. So just to really recap the AIT Benefits, which stands for Automatic Information Technology. That's the auto ID that I'm referring to with the use of barcode and RFID. By using this technology, you can really get that data accuracy from the start. And it starts with oftentimes the contractors who are getting the embedded, the pedigree data of those items accurate and flowing through to these government systems. So the governments can use it and start to infuse it into their own systems using that IUID as that key field that represents it no matter where it goes in the world. For you as contractors, it really should be enabling a time saver in your operations, but also getting paid faster. Yes, there is more effort in which to make sure a barcode goes on an item. In this case, where an IUID may be part of your obligation, but for in the property world, you already know asset identification and how important that is, and ensuring that you just get the right standard now implemented so that you can get those consistent payments coming your way to know that you're meeting those contract obligations. Also, it'll reveal the effective use of the resources within your operation when you have that detail as to when assets are moving, being able to get visibility of it, knowing when stockouts happen so you can place reorders when necessary. And we mentioned total asset visibility and an improved return on investment with this technology. GAO did actually weigh in on this along the way, and the GAO said, okay, military, we've analyzed, we've interviewed, we've done our analysis, and we've revealed that this is good for the government. IUID is here, it's here to stay, and we need to make sure we're doing it consistently because it's imperative for, among other things, this maintenance and the massive amount of maintenance that's being performed inside the military in order to make sure all of our systems are operational. The GAO said, look, we need to establish some quantifiable goals for gauging the IUID marking progress. We have to make sure our policies and procedures are ensuring that the 2D data matrix barcode, that IUID that I showed you, are coming from contractors, are in fact readable, reliable. You can't just look at it visually and say, yeah, that's a readable barcode, because you can look at a barcode, think it's going to be readable, but you've got to be able to scan it and verify that it's meeting the MIL standard 130 for your grading obligations in order to ensure it's at the right level of grade so that a machine readable code can read it and interpret it, not only from when you ship it, but into the future, assuming it's under normal operating conditions. GAO also said, hey, let's get some DoD legacy item marking going, and we're seeing that in a number of different areas of the military where in these legacy environments, they are marking more. And usually it's opportunistically as items are coming back into their operation. They also said, let's examine and report on contracts that should include these acquired items and GFP clauses in them. And of course, we all know that you all are directly impacted by that. And we see the scorecards in the various branches of the military saying, yes, we put these clauses in. And yes, not only did we put them in, but these contractors are in fact meeting these obligations. There is work to do, make no mistake, across the board on the Defense Department's level of effort to make sure that this is in fact being done consistently. But each day that ticks by, you see more and more of this activity happening now. Also, they needed to make sure that this data, which is being led by the IUID, is flowing through to their ERP systems. And a lot's transpired across the military branches when it comes to ERP systems, but some of them are having great success with it. Some of them are still working on it when it comes to making sure the ERP systems can use it consistently. So overall, keep doing it. Let's use it for that asset accountability, tracking, and overall asset lifecycle management that's imperative to our military.
Okay. So what does that mean? It means there's a lot more items in play. A lot more items in play, meaning that all is all. not only must the asset tag number be IUID compliant, it means the data must be registered in the master data source, which is the registry. The $5,000 threshold for reporting the GFP items has been removed. That means all must be reported, whether serially managed or not. The GFP managers can now think of IUID as not as the exception, but as the rule. I think, this is probably a good time to address one of the questions that came up that I was just reading. And the question was, when legacy, I'll summarize it, when legacy property is received and they're not given the full information on contract award, how can we do our jobs? We're not getting extra money to do this or anything. It just makes it more difficult. My answer to you is that it's a contracts issue, that you need to make sure that you're part of the proposal and solicitation so that you can have a say in this. It is only then will anyone understand what exactly it is that you have to do. You need to be able to see that GFP attachment before award, because if you're not given that opportunity, you will not be able, or you're going to cost your company a lot more money, because there's more things that you'll have to do with all the information that is not provided. I would recommend, if you do have that issue, that you do a time study and list every step that you need to take when you get an item that doesn't have the information in it, and that fact that you have to register it and report it, so that you can at least have something to go back to your contracts office with. But all is all, and there's no way to get out of it. You do have to report it. Takeaways.
Okay, so here we are with, at the top saying, audit ready by September 2017. Well, we don't know. We haven't read the last chapter of the book yet. We're still waiting for this FY18 auditing to produce the final report. And that's what's going to be telling. We think we have some key insights into how this story ends. Let's just say there's probably some work to be done here. And, so we will all be keeping tuned in to what happens now. But know that, that's where the $918 million that have been allocated is currently being spent to perform these audits and to resolve issues is being allocated for. So audits in the FIAR, audits are in process for FY18, but will continue again in FY19, because now, this in fact is an annual requirement. IUID is in fact the best way and the way to identify, mark, and track assets on a global scale for the military. That is, been established, and that's going to be the methodology for many years to come. The next one down is the PIEE, which is now the new acronym which represents the Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, as you can see is with the asterisk at the bottom. That is what we formerly known as this wide area workflow e-commerce capability system, if you will, in which data was being submitted. I think they called it the e-business suite, if I'm not mistaken. But now it's been renamed the PIEE, and that houses now wide area workflow, and it houses the GFP module for property reporting, and it houses the IUID registry. So this platform is sort of growing in its nature. It looks like they're realigning some systems. Again, IRAPT, that acronym went away, at least on paper. And so you may still see it, and I'm sure like all these things, it takes time, but that becomes the reporting mechanism in which you need to submit your data. GAO has got ways to tell the DoD, you got to do this better, and this is how you can do it better. And then what you need to do is stay ahead of this FIAR curve as you're doing now with gaining this knowledge, understanding the different dynamics of managing data and policy in your contract obligations and reporting. We certainly encourage that asset management tools that also have these embedded compliance and automation capabilities are and will continue to be a key tool, and something that if you're not managing with these more evolved and modern systems, you ought to look at within your operation, and how you can make these improvements, because again, manual processing is and should be becoming a thing of the past, where you can gain more automation, save time, and improve your accuracy. So this does become a wake-up call for the contractors and your importance in your organization and the role you play. You have a crucial role here, which is how do you help your company stay ahead of the curve? And staying ahead of the curve means, how do you know that all your items are actually being recorded and reported consistently? Do you have that certainty where you can know that at any point, if the DCMA were to come in, or any auditors, anyone performing an audit within a 10-day window, that you've got your record keeping right where it should be? Are you MIL Standard 130 compliant to that obligation to perform IUID marking and all the quality controls that go behind it, meaning verifying the quality of the mark and ensuring that it meets the standards set by the DoD. It also should allow you to be smarter about your bid responses. And Pat made a good point a moment ago, being involved in that solicitation level, coming in with your capabilities and being able to say, okay, we have a role here, and there's a cost associated with that role, as it supports the winning of your future contracts. Also, it lets you handle your project estimates more accurately by staying ahead of the curve and knowing what you're going to be dealing with and responsible for, whether it's reparables and handling those, or GFP and how that impacts you. And if you're shipping stuff too, there's always a risk, as if we've seen it before, where items get shipped and rejected if the UID requirement isn't being met, or requiring contractors to come on site at the end location, meaning where they were delivered to, and resolving the issue of ensuring that all of this data marking on items and reporting is being done. So win more contracts is the goal at the end of the day. And you can see the counterpoint of those contractors that are behind the curve, and the costs associated with rejected shipments or delayed bid responses, or not being 130 compliant, not having your items or your record keeping in order. The potential to be high risk on your contract is very real, and certainly lost contract opportunities in this very competitive environment is very real. So for those who are in custodians, which is probably largely everyone here, Property Manager A, ahead of the curve, has got full property accountability. That automated reporting up through to government systems, meaning a way in which to electronically move data, once it's been verified and according to the business rules, where it seamlessly flows through to these government systems. They can also perform, regular sustainable inventories, and quickly is a criteria here, because you want to ensure that, you're not wasting a lot of time in order to get this data accurate about your property and where it is. And of course, that gives you lots of confidence when the auditors come in and you're audit ready, versus the flip side, which is inaccurate or incomplete records. We often come across companies that, may have, 60% accuracy on their record keeping, meaning sometimes records may be missing or inaccurate in some capacity where the data does not, the pedigree record does not match the physical item pedigree. And those issues need to be resolved. A lot of manual data processing means wasted time. You've got laborious or error-prone inventories as a result. And of course, nobody wants that audit nightmare. It adds way too much stress to the day-to-day. Okay. So that brings us to, really the final slide here, which really means what compliance means. Compliance, if you've got two sides of the brain here, means supporting property management, all your FIAR obligations as they are evolving in front of you. Your IUID compliance relative to the MIL Standard 130 we've spoken to, and then your DCMA readiness. Those issues can't be ignored anymore, while also implementing the best practices, which means, to address your record keeping, your automation of government reporting, of course, your asset identification according to these new standards, and then tracking and reporting with these auto ID technologies. Pat, is there anything that you might add there?
No, I just think that they're not going to let anyone off the hook. And I think the fact that the government is now being audited for themselves, they're going to make sure that everyone is, in fact, complying with their IUID requirements, both marking and reporting.
Yeah, great. So we thank you for participating here and allowing us to share. And if there's any further offline questions that you want to pursue us for, we're open and available to answering any questions for you. I think back to you, Jessica.
Thanks very much. Yes, we have a number of questions typed in. We'll get as many out as we can here in the next couple of minutes. If we don't get to you, feel free to email Peter or Pat, or if you email me, I'll send it over their way. The first question, how does the IUID registry handle virtual tags for items that are too small to tag?
Well,
go ahead, Pat.
It's too small to tag. There's got to be an indicator in the DoD guide for marking items. It should be somewhere either in MIL Standard 130. They'll talk about stuff that's too small to mark. There might be some guidance in there, or on the DoD procurement toolbox where it talks to marking.
Yeah, and Pat, on top of that, there is been as a best practice for those items that are just too small to mark, there is a bag and tag approach, which would allow you to actually apply a tag to the bag itself. When you have an item in inventory, you can put the item in the bag, assuming that you can. That would be worth looking into as well as an approach. And then you can get a physical barcode on the bag and then at least get your item registered up to the IUID registry. And I believe, and I'd have to go back and just double check this, that there is a way of talking about the marking method when you register that. And I believe a bag and tag is a method.
Yes, you have to, when you do your data submission, you have to tell how the item is marked or not marked, and it'll give you that area is the place that you would address that.
Thanks very much. My next question, do we have to report government furnished material to the IUI database, such as explosives?
Yes, all is all. Remember we said the $5,000 went away, and it's both UII marked and serially managed and non-serially managed. So there are no exceptions to this as far as GFP is concerned.
Thank you. Next question, does DCMA perform audits at government-owned contractor-operated facilities?
At GOCOs, yes, they do. They do perform audits at GOCOs.
Very good. So in this scenario, we had an auditor basically show up at a facility without any U.S. government personnel and without notice. Who would have been responsible for providing that notification?
That should have come out at a minimum, because it's Ernst & Young. Obviously, it was a FIAR audit. It should have come out of the contracting office, the PCO's office, whether it's the contracting office's rep. Someone should have been notified. That's just really poor business practice in general. I don't know how. I think that I wouldn't think that you would have to entertain them at that point without getting some type of notification, because you may not even be there. I mean, who knows? But that it should be coming through the contracting office's representative, whoever that may be, PCO, ACO, your DCMA. Someone should have notified someone.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll wrap it up with one final question, which is a follow-up to the question regarding virtual tags for the IUID registry. What if the tag cannot be placed on the item because of a certain coating or because it goes into extreme heat? How would you handle that?
Again, when you do your reporting, you'll see that there's certain codes and information, and one of them is the MARC record. So within that MARC record, there'll be certain aspects of it that you would address to indicate that it couldn't be coded, it couldn't be tagged. But you have to look in there for the specifics. And there's a guide on the DoD procurement register or procurement toolbox that'll give you the guide for marking.
Great, thank you very much, Pat. Any final thoughts before we wrap up for the day?
Good on this end.
I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen, and I hope everyone has gotten something out of this.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica, and we appreciate being involved with NPMA as always.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate the content, and for those of you on the call, you will receive, I believe it's scheduled to come out tomorrow. You'll get a copy or a link to the recording from today in case you want a refresher on some of the content, and also feel free to email any of us if you have any outstanding questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So thanks, everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.